The ground war began before dawn on February 24, 1991, not as a single charge, but as a door opening along the whole front. For more than 5 weeks, coalition aircraft had battered Iraqi command posts, air defenses, artillery, supply routes, and troop positions, while soldiers in the desert waited beside vehicles packed and ready to move. Then, the waiting ended. From the Persian Gulf in the east to the wide emptiness of the western desert, coalition forces crossed into the fight, each blow meant to confuse, fix, or break a different part of the Iraqi defense. The famous 100-hour war had begun, but no one living through that morning could know it would be remembered as short. To the men moving into Kuwait and Iraq, it was simply the moment when planning stopped being a promise and became dust under tracks. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. The first sound of the ground campaign was not one sound at all. It was engines starting in darkness, artillery firing into known and suspected positions, radios passing clipped instructions, engineers checking breach lanes, helicopters moving low, and armored columns beginning to unfold. The coalition plan depended on simultaneity, the difficult art of making many actions happen at once so the enemy could not tell which one mattered most. Along the Kuwaiti front, Marines and Arab coalition forces attacked toward the defenses Iraq had been preparing for months. Farther west, other forces moved into the desert, where Iraqi commanders were less prepared to look. The point was not just to advance. It was to make Iraq's army face too many problems at once, too quickly, across too much space. On the eastern side of the battlefield, close to the coast and the most obvious approaches into Kuwait, the fighting had a brutal and deliberate purpose. Coalition forces needed Iraqi commanders to believe the main danger might still be there, near the roads, oil facilities, and defensive belts that had occupied their attention since the invasion. Marines pressed into Kuwait with armor, infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support, confronting mines, trenches, bunkers, and Iraqi troops who had endured the air campaign but not vanished. Arab coalition units also moved into the fight, giving the liberation of Kuwait political as well as military force. These attacks were real, dangerous, and costly in human terms, not theatrical gestures. Yet they also helped hold Iraqi eyes toward the south and east, while the heavier turning movement gathered strength far away. Near the Wadi al Batin, the dry channel that seemed to offer a natural route northward, coalition actions added to the deception. Iraqi commanders had reason to fear an attack through that corridor, and the coalition encouraged that fear. Demonstrations, artillery, movement, and limited attacks helped suggest that the old, obvious line of advance might still become decisive. This mattered because an army defends best when it understands the question being asked of it. If Iraq believed the coalition would come straight through the prepared front, its defensive system made more sense. If the true blow was coming far to the west, that system was already beginning to fail. On February 24th, the coalition was not only attacking Iraqi positions, it was attacking Iraqi expectations. Far out in the west, where the desert opened into distances that seemed almost empty, 18th Airborne Corps began its wide sweep. Its mission was to guard the outer flank of the Great Envelopment, threaten Iraqi rear areas, and stretch the battlefield beyond the shape Iraq had prepared to defend. This was not a parade across harmless sand. Units had to navigate across long distances, keep fuel moving, maintain communications, and remain ready for unexpected contact. The 101st Airborne Division used helicopters to leap deep into the theater, while mechanized elements, such as the 24th Infantry Division, added armored weight to the outer hook. The movement carried a message Iraq did not yet fully grasp. The coalition was not simply entering Kuwait, it was reaching behind the army that occupied it. Between the coastal fight and the far western sweep, 7th Corps prepared to become the main armored hammer. Its divisions did not all crash forward at the same instant on February 24th, as though released from a starting line. Heavy corps warfare is more controlled and more cumbersome than that. The Corps had to move through lanes, maintain alignment, pass through breach areas, and prepare for the later turn east that would bring it into the Republican Guard. The 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, the Corps Cavalry, would screen ahead when the time came, searching for Iraqi forces and protecting the larger formations behind it. On this first day, the Corps was still part of a vast choreography. Its greatest collision lay ahead, but the machinery of that collision had begun to move. The old problem facing any attacker in modern war was still there: obstacles. Mines do not care that aircraft have destroyed command posts. Wire does not disappear because an enemy division has poor morale. Trenches, berms, ditches, and prepared fighting positions can slow even a powerful armored force if engineers, artillery, infantry, and tanks do not work together. That is why breaching operations mattered so much on February 24th. Engineers had to open paths through minefields and barriers, while other arms suppressed defenders and protected the work. This was patient, dangerous labor inside a campaign remembered for speed. Before armored formations could race into the deep desert, someone had to solve the ugly physical problem of getting through the crust of the Iraqi defense. For many Iraqi soldiers, the morning brought the final collapse of a long ordeal. They had been bombed for weeks, cut off from reliable information, and left in positions that often seemed less like a defense of Kuwait than a waiting room for disaster. Some surrendered quickly when coalition troops arrived, walking out of trenches and bunkers, hungry, exhausted, and unwilling to die for Saddam's occupation. Others fired, resisted, or stayed hidden until forced out. The Iraqi army was not one emotional condition spread evenly across the sand. It was a mixture of frightened conscripts, hardened veterans, political loyalists, exhausted officers, and units whose ability to fight depended on local leadership and circumstance. The coalition had weakened the whole system, but each position still had to be encountered in the real world. The coalition's advantage on February 24th was not merely that it had better machines, it had initiative. Iraqi commanders were now reacting to movements already underway, while coalition commanders were executing a plan that had been rehearsed, supplied, and protected by air superiority. This difference in tempo was decisive. When a defending army receives reports too slowly, when movement is dangerous, when communications are damaged, and when senior leaders hesitate to act without permission, events begin to run ahead of orders. The coalition's aim was to keep that happening. Every attack near Kuwait, every thrust in the west, every aircraft overhead, and every armored formation moving into position widened the gap between what Iraq needed to understand and what it could actually do about it. Still, the first day should not be remembered as effortless. Armored warfare on this scale is a fight against friction, even when the enemy is disoriented. Vehicles break down, routes clog, units lose time, dust hides movement, and commanders must make decisions with incomplete reports. A formation may be powerful and still arrive late. A supply column may be well planned and still struggle to find the right unit in a landscape of similar-looking vehicles and sand. Soldiers who had waited for months now had to act while carrying all the fatigue and tension of that waiting into motion. The coalition had trained hard and planned carefully, but the ground war's opening hours were not clean lines on a briefing map. They were confusion, forced into order by discipline. The strategic purpose of February 24th was to set conditions for the deeper destruction of Iraq's army. Liberating Kuwait was the moral and political center of the war, but the coalition also needed to defeat the forces that could threaten Kuwait again or retreat in enough order to claim survival. That is why the Republican Guard mattered so much. Those formations were not sitting directly on every beach or trench line. They were deeper in the Iraqi system, positioned to reinforce, counterattack, or cover withdrawal. The first day of the ground war began the process of unhinging the front so that 7th Corps could reach them. The path to 73 Easting ran through this larger opening movement because the cavalry could only find the Republican Guard after the campaign had pried open the approaches. By the end of February 24, the shape of the war had changed, even if the decisive armored battle had not yet arrived. Iraqi defenses in the south were under heavy pressure. Coalition forces were inside Kuwait and Iraq. The Western envelopment was taking form, and the assumptions behind Saddam's defense were beginning to crack. The coalition had transformed months of deployment into motion across a front so wide that no Iraqi headquarters could easily master it. The 100-hour war would later sound almost tidy, as though the ground campaign were a swift final act after the air war had done the real work. But on that first day, the lesson was richer and more human. Modern armored victory began with many arms moving together: infantry fixing, engineers breaching, aircraft isolating, artillery suppressing, logistics sustaining, and heavy armor gathering itself for the turn east. February 24 was the opening of the gate, and beyond it waited the storm, the grid lines, and the cavalry fight that would give 73 Easting its name.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.